Welcome to the Veganuary podcast, the podcast that helps you to try a vegan diet. It's stuffed full of hints and tips for vegans and veg-curious people. Welcome back, Wendy. January 2024 is now in the rearview mirror. So I thought we could just mention some of our highlights from Veganuary 2024.
Love it.
So, shall I go? I'll go first. So in the UK, so the overall theme of Veganuary 2024 was vote for veggies. And in the UK, we had some really fun, kind of a pastiche of an electoral campaign. So we had a bus that had vegan slogans on the side and pictures of vegetables that drove all around London. And we had a kind of party political campaign ad. That was really fun. So that got some really good visibility of Veganuary. And then some other highlights for me. As you know, Wendy, I'm like a TV addict. So I was really excited to see Veganuary mentioned in some like iconic British TV shows. So on New Year's Day, on EastEnders, one of the characters said that they were going to try and do Veganuary. And the chat show Graham Norton, he suddenly just shouted in the middle of a conversation, "It's Veganuary!" And that was exciting. And then Countdown. Countdown is like this beloved quiz show here in the UK. And Colin Murray, who presents for Countdown, spoke for quite a long time about Veganuary and how impactful it's been in increasing the availability of vegan food. How about you over in the States? What were your highlights?
Yeah, incredible. And the bus looked so cool in London. It's hard to narrow it down, honestly, but 3 come to mind right away. One is that we had a Veganuary billboard in Times Square on New Year's Eve and New Year's Day, which is, of course, an iconic moment, and it wished everyone a happy Veganuary in addition to a happy New Year. The city of Baltimore proclaimed January as Veganuary. So it was the first city that we've ever had issue a mayoral proclamation. So I thought that was quite cool and something I'd like to do more of in the future. And going even bigger than citywide or global, we actually had a Veganuary flag on the International Space Station this year, which as a total space nerd really blew my mind. Yeah, I thought that was a very cool activation.
Veganuary in space. I loved that. And we have Claire Lynch with us, who we're going to interview in a second. But Claire, before we do, did you have any Veganuary highlights?
Yeah, I think mine's more personal, actually. I had a new client who came to me just maybe 9 or 10 days ago because they started Veganuary, and then they obviously started looking into all the health benefits and found plant-based health professionals and found me through that. So I'm really wanting to sort of impact their health, sort of a middle-aged guy with the start of a few health problems that's really wanting to sort of make some lifestyle changes and impact their health. So that's all come from starting on Veganuary. So that's fantastic.
That's amazing. Well, we wanted to get you on, Claire, because this year we have had a bit more of a nutrition focused and we've been working with the plant-based health professionals to really make sure the tips and advice we're giving are really kind of nutritionally sound, I suppose. So we thought this was a great opportunity for you to come join us on the podcast and we could ask you a bit about nutrition. So Claire Lynch is a freelance dietitian and the education lead for plant-based health professionals, having previously worked in the UK National Health Service as a community and diabetes dietitian. Claire believes in empowering people with the knowledge and skills they need to transform their lives through the positive diet and lifestyle changes. How was that for an introduction, Claire?
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Very accurate.
Good. Okay. I'll start by asking you what we ask everyone, which is, what is your dream vegan meal?
I just love my vegetables. I really do. So I think aubergines are quite often the highlight of my meal. I love miso or miso, however you want to say it. So I quite often make a bit of a marinade with miso paste, probably some tamari, and quite often some maple syrup, sweeten it up a bit. Maybe something else like some chili flakes or something, or a bit of mustard or something, add a bit of spice, and then sort of spread that on, baste the aubergine slices with it and bake them so they get really soft and gooey. That's a real favourite of mine. And then I might have that with some tempeh and some brown rice and a load of greens or something like that. But yeah.
Yeah, and for our American listeners, aubergine is what we call eggplant, and that sounds delicious.
So Claire, tell us about your plant-based journey. What triggered your decision to start eating more plant-based food?
It's quite a long one, actually, because it started in my teenage years. I read Animal Farm, George Orwell. And to be honest, I can't even really remember the book now, but I just know that I came home and decided I wasn't going to eat meat anymore. So I became a vegetarian. I think I was around 13, 14 at the time. And then carried on, to my mum's surprise. I didn't think she didn't think it would last. Carried on for a fair while. But then I started having children in my early 20s. And unfortunately, back then, I didn't have the confidence to realise that it was okay to bring up children I was vegetarian at the time, not vegan, but on a vegetarian diet. So I kind of ditched it at that point. I thought I can't bother cooking 2 different meals and I can't bring him up vegetarian. So I just ditched it and buried my head in the sand for a very long time, unfortunately. Obviously, regret that now, but there you go. That's life, isn't it? So sort of 20 years went by, 6 children later.
Wow.
And then I went back to uni. I was a nurse originally, and I went back to uni and studied dietetics. And then I think that was the first time I actually was around sort of 3 or 4 vegans. There happened to be 3 or 4 vegans on the course. And obviously I was looking into nutrition and health more just because of the course I was doing. Came across some websites, things like nutritionfacts.org, read the China study, which is Colin Campbell's study, and then realised about the health benefits of eating plant-based food. So sort of decided, I think I was a vegan waiting to come out all those years in any case. So I kind of jumped, the kids are older now. Most of them, they're adults. The 3 of them have already fled the nest. So it's become a bit easier with the cooking and things. So I decided to jump on board. And that was 2018. So about 6 years ago now. And so I've been vegan since then and absolutely loved it.
Did it rub off on the kids? Do the kids eat veggie or vegan?
So my youngest is almost vegan, does eat a little bit of cheese and that, but very little. One of my boys did Veganuary 2 years ago. I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, that he did it vegetarian, not vegan. And he actually lasted for a couple of years, but unfortunately he travels a lot with his work and he's just really struggled with that sort of having to grab food on the hop. So he seems to have sidelined for a little while. But his girlfriend's vegetarian, so I'm hopeful that he'll go back to it. And one of my other daughter also was vegetarian for a little while and gave up on it as well. She was cooking for herself. She's not keen on vegetables and a lot of those sort of things. So I think she struggled to give herself food that she likes. So not entirely successful, but I do cook vegan food for the family that are still at home. When I started, I would do a bit of both. I would sort of cook something like a stir fry that I could have without the meat and then throw some chicken at the end for them. But that's kind of, over the years, I've managed to get rid of that. So they do eat vegan at home.
Amazing. So you talked a bit about going to school to become a dietitian. How did you come about that career path? And could you tell us a little bit about the work you do now with plant-based health professionals?
Yeah. Well, I suppose when the kids got older, I wanted to go back and have my own career then, because I didn't work at all for a lot of that time. And then I sort of just did a local supermarket job. Realised I still had a lot of working years in me and I'd like to do something a little bit more sort of fulfilling for me. So I think my natural path was healthcare, because I had done nursing for a while, in my younger adulthood. But I was really, with the kids sort of growing up, obviously I started doing a lot of cooking. I was on a budget a lot of that time, so I had to do a lot of home cooking, got more and more interested in nutrition and food and things, became a bit of a foodie really. So I think it was a natural thing for me to be in healthcare and to follow my passion with food as well. So that's what kind of landed me in dietetics. So yeah. And then plant-based health professionals. I'm the education lead for plant-based health professionals. So a delightful, amazing job. I can't believe that I still can't believe nearly a year later that I've got this job. And my role is to sort of take charge of the educational output that comes out of there. So I sort of Been spending time looking over the fact sheets. We're sort of renewing some of them. We've been adding some new ones. I've renewed the 21-day plant-based health challenge that we have, which is sort of 21-day, you get an email every day. So I've rewritten all those emails, and there's some videos and things as well. So I sort of spent some time doing that when I first joined. So that's actually a really good thing. You know, if people have done Veganuary and they wanted to carry on and they want a bit more information about the nutritional side of things, that's really great, because each day I'll cover a different topic, sort of protein one day, iron another day, fish another day, you know, physical activity another day. So it's really quite good, that. And then we had a big conference last year, so I spent a long time sort of helping to organise that. And now I'm trying to sort of get in, spending a lot of time trying to get in with some of the dietetics courses, see if we can get some more education within those courses about plant-based nutrition, because unfortunately it's not really sort of done in most of them still. So we need, and just generally, you know, within the healthcare space as an organisation, we're trying to sort of educate, you know, healthcare professionals about the benefits of a plant-based diet. So
yeah, heartily recommend the resources and fact sheets you supply. They're really useful. So, okay, let's get into vegan nutrition. Often when people first try eating vegan, they are warned about the health implications. How do you respond to people who say that a vegan diet doesn't provide enough nutrition?
Yeah, it's common, isn't it? And especially the protein thing, which I'm sure we'll talk about later. I mean, generally, people who eat a vegan or plant-based diet are actually more careful about the nutrition they're getting. I would say that, you know, they're more aware of nutrition and sort of look into what they're eating. I'd say most people who live in the Western world just eat and don't really think about what nutrients they're getting. And don't worry about deficiencies for particular micronutrients and things like that. That there is a bit of an obsession with macronutrients in terms of sort of carbohydrates and proteins and things. But I think generally people don't worry about that. So I don't really know why there's an obsession that as soon as you're eating plants, that's suddenly a big problem. But with any dietary pattern, there are nutrients that are you're sort of more at risk of inadequacy, and there are nutrients that you can easily get more of. And so that's the same with an omnivorous diet, a vegetarian diet, a vegan diet. You know, it's different nutrients, but obviously with a vegan diet, you've got much more fiber, you've got plenty of magnesium, plenty of folate. You know, there's all these nutrients that you've got plenty of, vitamin C, vitamin E. Whereas on an omnivorous diet, then you maybe, you know, you're often lacking in fiber. And then you might have too much of some nutrients that aren't good, like saturated fats. You've got less folate, less magnesium, and so that, you know, it balances out. You know, we've got a great table actually where it shows you the different diets and the different nutrients of inadequacy and nutrients of where there's plenty, and it really balances out. So there's no good argument that vegan diets are less abundant in micronutrients and things than any other diet.
We hear from Veganuary participants all the time who tell us that they notice health benefits during their challenge, but I'm hoping you can break that down for us in a more scientific way. What evidence is there that plant-based diets are actually healthier?
Okay, there's a lot of evidence. There's different types of studies. There's there's randomized control trials, which are the sort of studies you would use for drugs, where they have a placebo and the actual drug that they're using, and people are blinded and they don't know which they're having. But obviously with nutrition, it's much harder to do that because you can't be blinded as to what you're eating, can you? So those studies aren't really very common with nutrition studies. So we tend to generally use observational studies more. But some of these studies are really, really large studies. So they have a cohort of people who they follow over years and decades. So there's sort of 3 or 4 main ones that we sort of take a lot of the data from these cohorts. There's things like the Nurses Health Study and the Health Professionals Follow-Up Study that are in America. There's the Advantis Health Study. There's the EPIC Oxford Study. There's the UK Biobank Study. So all these studies have basically lots of participants that they're following across the years and the decades. The UK Biobank, for example, has nearly 500,000 people that they're following. Wow. And they're healthy when they start. I think it varies, but some of them they've been following since their late 80s, 90s. Generally sort of midlife, they start following them when they're about 40 and they're healthy and they don't have any chronic diseases. And then they follow them and they give them dietary questionnaires sort of from time to time over the years. They take bloods to take, sort of cholesterol levels, things like that, blood pressure, different scans and things, so they can sort of follow their health over the years, ask them questions about their lifestyle, whether they're smokers, whether they drink, how much physical activity they do, and things like that. And then they just see what diseases they get. And obviously some of them will die during the studies. Most of them are ongoing now, still in any case. And then they see what they die of. And basically these statistics are used by researchers to analyse, to see what the risks are. So they're sort of correlations, these risks. It's not, you can't sort of prove it's causative, but through the statistical analysis, because there's such large numbers of people, they can sort of analyse them and say it's statistically significant, which basically means that there's almost no chance of it being a coincidence that this correlation exists between one thing and another. So it might be between smoking and heart disease or something, and they'll find these correlations. So obviously a lot of those our studies for food comes from them. So they'll split people down into categories, into things like whether they're an omnivore diet, a pesco vegetarian diet, a lacto vegetarian diet, and a vegan diet. The trouble is a lot of these studies haven't got high amounts of vegans in them. But a lot of those you can, there are great results that show, like, for example, in the Epic Oxford study, they showed a 25% reduction in heart disease risk from the sort of meat eaters to the vegans. So if you have a vegan diet, you're 25% less likely to get heart disease than if you're on a meat eater diet. That's from the Epic Oxford study. So there's those sort of statistics that come out of these studies. And then what they've started doing more recently, which is really helpful, is they've made a plant-based diet index, which is basically, so this can include people that aren't necessarily fully vegan. So they'll score foods. So they've got, I think it's 18 foods in this list, in food groups, and they score foods sort of positively if they're healthy plant-based food, negatively if they're an unhealthy plant-based food or an animal food. So they've split them into sort of plant-based diets, healthy plant-based diets, and unhealthy plant-based diets. So it's just basically sort of the more plant-based foods, healthy plant-based foods, and then they split them into quintiles. So like the people that eat the most plant-based foods to the people that eat the least plant-based foods, and then they can compare them. So those sort of studies are really useful because, again, it just shows that people don't necessarily have to be 100% vegan, which some people don't want to be, but they can include more plants and make a difference. So those sort of studies have shown that things like coronary heart disease, there's sort of 25% lower risk from the people who eat the most healthy plants to the people who eat the least. Type 2 diabetes, it's a 34% decreased risk. There's total cancers, reduced risk, strokes, reduced risk, kidney disease is reduced risk. Parkinson's disease, dementia, fatty liver, all-cause mortality, everything across the board. When you look at these studies, it's basically what we would sort of call sort of dose dependent. So, basically the more plants you're eating, the healthier you are and the less likely you are to get all these chronic diseases. That was quite long and complicated. Did that make sense?
No, it made great sense. And, what is there to lose? It sounds like you can fight all sorts of health issues by eating more plants, which is great. So what kinds of things should people be eating to ensure they have a really healthy vegan diet? And what kind of things should we avoid? Because, I say all the time, just going vegan isn't necessarily a silver bullet. You still have to think about what you eat.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that plant-based diet index I was just talking about is a cautionary tale, actually, for people on plant-based diets that do base a lot of their diets around more unhealthy foods, because the statistics do show that, if you have an unhealthy plant-based diet, you do have increased risk of all of those things that we're saying. It doesn't decrease your risk, it increases your risk. So by unhealthy plant-based foods, obviously I'm talking about the really sort of the fatty foods, the sugary foods, so a lot of pies, a lot of obviously Oreos, your fried foods, your chips, donuts, all those things, they're all vegan, aren't they? Or they can be. Crisps. But so if you base your diet around those foods, then you're probably not going to get the health benefits. That is not to say that you can't have any of those foods. That's what we're talking about here is sort of what you're focusing most of your diet on.
Yeah.
So if you're focusing most of your diet on healthy whole plant foods, so by that I'm sort of talking fruits, vegetables, legumes, which is peas, beans and lentils and chickpeas, whole grains, so whole grain breads, whole grain rice, whole grain pastas, things like quinoa, buckwheat, all of those different things. Sort of your tubers like sweet potatoes are really good, vegetables, fruits, nuts and seeds, herbs and spices. So if you're basing most of your food around those foods, then that's really great, and you should discover the real good health benefits from that. It's not to say, food isn't all about nutrition, is it? Food's a social thing, food's enjoyment, food could be a comfort thing. All of us want to have, sort of the treats every so often and things like that. So, and also, I don't want to vilify all processed foods either, because there are processed foods that can be really helpful for us to get nutrients into our diet. So things like plant-based milks, are really helpful to get calcium into our diets because they're fortified with calcium. So, and they're not. I know there's been a lot of sort of stuff in the press about how terrible plant-based milks are. So I definitely want to say that's not the case. And there's degrees of processing, isn't there? Obviously, canned foods are processed to a degree. Anything that's chopped or preserved in any way is processed to a degree. So there's degrees of processing, and I don't want to vilify all processed foods.
What about corn? Where do you see corn as in terms of healthy or unhealthy?
So again, I think, all of those sort of meat alternatives, corn is probably one of the better ones. It's quite low in fat. Obviously, not all corn's vegan, is it? So just be a bit careful if you are vegan.
Good point.
But yeah, it's made of mycoprotein, which is kind of a fungi. So it's quite high in protein, reasonably low in fat, low in saturated fats. And it can be really helpful to help people, like I said, we'll talk about protein, but it can be helpful to have those plant-based meat alternatives to reach your protein needs. Because, things like chickpeas and lentils and things which are high in protein are quite filling as well. And especially if if you're an older adult with quite a small appetite, it can be quite difficult to eat these sort of bulky, filling foods. I mean, that's one of the advantages of a plant-based diet, is that because plant-based foods have a lot of fibre in them, they're very filling. And so because you get full, you tend to overeat, and therefore they are actually helpful with weight management as well. If you are struggling with weight gain, then that's really helpful because you'll get full quicker. You don't tend to crave food so much when you're having more of these whole foods. But on the other end of the spectrum, if you're not very well or you're elderly and you've not got a large appetite, then it can be hard sometimes to get enough calories and enough protein. So definitely helpful. And just again, sort of on a social side of things, if you're at a barbecue, if you're a young person that's a vegan at a barbecue, you want to be able to slap a burger on the barbecue, don't you? You want to be able to fit in with your friends. So they're really useful. I wouldn't vilify them at all. I would say, again, when you're choosing your protein sources, more often than not, try and choose the beans and the lentils and things like that, tempeh, tofu. But definitely the plant-based meat alternatives are good as well. Seitan's really, really high in protein.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up protein because, it's almost become a parody at this point, the where do you get your protein question, because it's asked of vegans so often. But I think these questions come from a real genuine place of concern, right? In the US, we grew up learning that if we don't drink milk every day, we're basically going to crumble to dust. So what I'd like to do for the next question is just run through a few of those key nutrition areas that we get asked about often, and just have you sort of rapid fire tell us a few foods on a vegan diet where you can find these nutrients. So the first is protein, which you just touched on. So I think we can go to the next because I think you gave us quite a few examples there. How about B12?
Yeah, so B12 is a nutrient that you do need to supplement as a vegan. If you're on a fully plant-based diet, you definitely do. Having said that, it is not only people who are on plant-based diet that are short in B12. I think we know more and more now that people on omnivorous diets are quite regularly found to be low in vitamin B12. And particularly if you have certain medications, like if you're on metformin for diabetes, or if you're on protein pump inhibitors for acid reflux, there's certain medications where it sort of interferes with the absorption of B12. Older adults tend to absorb B12 less well. So quite often people will get low in B12 in any case when they're older adults. But B12 isn't found in any plant foods now because it does come from, it's made by bacteria in the soil. So now our food is much more sanitized than it used to be. Back in the day, it used to be in the drinking water. It would be on our food because it wasn't as well sanitized as it is now. But it's not now. So the reason it's in meat generally a lot of the time is because the animals are actually supplemented themselves with B12. But on a plant-based diet, some plant-based milks are supplemented with B12. Things like nutritional yeast has B12 in it. So there are B12 in things in your diet, but definitely the safest way to get B12 is to supplement.
How about iodine?
Yes. So iodine is found in the soil near the sea and in the sea. So most plant-based foods are quite low in iodine. So they, again, most people in this country will get most of the iodine from dairy, and the reason it's in dairy actually, and from eggs, but the reason it's in dairy and eggs is because chicken feed is supplemented with iodine, and cows also get iodine in their feed as well, and also it gets contaminated. The teats and the milking machinery is sanitized with iodine-containing solutions, so that sort of contaminates the milk. So iodine gets into milk through that source. So we can get iodine from seaweed, but the trouble is with that, it's quite unreliable. Some seaweeds can be really high levels of iodine, and some can be quite low. It's quite it's not very reliable. So generally, a couple of nori sheets of seaweed should be about right. But again, it's probably safer to supplement with it's about 140 micrograms of iodine you need.
I did not know that about how iodine got into eggs and dairy. That's so interesting.
Yeah. See, this is the thing. Most of the things that we need to supplement as vegans, the reason that meat eaters get them is because the animals are supplemented in any case. So it's just missing out the middle cow or the middle fish or the middle.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Yeah, and the next one I'm curious about is one that I've heard a lot of people talking about lately, which is omega-3.
Yeah, okay. So you'll be pleased to know, there are some natural sources of omega-3 in a plant-based diet. So there's different, it's quite complicated, I won't go to, there's long-chain omega-3s and short-chain omega-3s. So the long-chain ones you can only really get from fish, and fish get theirs from algae. But we can get the short-chain omega-3s from foods like flax seeds, chia seeds, hemp seeds, walnuts. So literally just a tablespoon of flax seeds, a tablespoon of chia seeds, or a couple of tablespoons of hemp seeds, or about 6 walnut halves per day is enough. So obviously you can easily get that in your breakfast, can't you? Just throw that on your cereal or in a soup or on a salad, or just have a handful of nuts for a snack. And that gives you the short-chain omega-3s. And they can be converted in your body to long-chain omega-3s. Now, the only precaution here is that, the research isn't great on this, and it's not everyone converts it very well. So again, a lot of vegans, plant-based people will take the algae-derived long-chain omega-3s, which is DHA and EPA, as well, just as a precaution. So that's kind of optional because the research isn't really strong on that. I do take them, but I also eat a lot of flaxseed and walnuts and things as well.
I just started taking a liquid DHA EPA supplement, and I really do feel like my brain is clipping along at a faster rate. It might be a placebo effect, but I've seen a bit. So how about calcium? Where can we find calcium on a vegan diet?
Yeah. Calcium's plentiful in a vegan diet. Obviously, the dairy lobby has made us believe that we have to have milk to get our calcium. As we all know, we've grown up believing that, haven't we? But yeah, you can get, obviously, the plant-based milks, like I said earlier, as long as you don't get the organic ones. The organic ones don't tend to be fortified because they're not allowed. It's counted as a additive, so they can't fortify. But yeah, sort of fortified plant-based milks, you get plenty of calcium from. But food-wise, sort of dark leafy greens, things like kale, rocket, and things like that. And sort of spring greens, I think you call them something else in America. Can't remember what you call them, but we call them spring greens here, or just greens. Just be a bit careful. There's what we call sort of high oxalate greens, which is things like spinach and Swiss chard and beet greens, that with the oxalate in them sort of interferes with the absorption of the calcium. So don't rely on those too heavily. It doesn't mean to say you can't have them. They're also good sources of iron. So, but yeah, just be careful. Make sure you get some of the low oxalate greens. So like I said, the sort of the kale and the greens, things like that. Then sort of beans are really good for calcium. Beans and some nuts and figs have a lot of calcium as well. So yeah.
Right, yeah, I'm curious. Spin greens.
Yeah, spring greens.
I know, I'm going to have to do a Google and figure out what we would call that.
What you call, because you say something about some other greens a lot, and I think it's the equivalent thing. But what's your other main greens that you have in America that aren't?
I think folks eat a lot of spinach, collards, Swiss chard, kale.
So I think our greens might be similar to our spring greens, but I'm not very. The other major source of calcium actually that I forgot as well is tofu. So if you make sure you get calcium set tofu, so some of the tofus aren't calcium set. So just make sure it's got. If you look at the ingredients, it'll have some calcium in the ingredients. So
very interesting.
It's a good brand in the UK for that, for calcium set tofu. That's a very good source of calcium.
Okay, well, just one more on the list then, which is iron.
Yeah, so iron, again, similar foods actually, sort of beans and lentils, whole grains are really high in iron, nuts and seeds, and again, dark leafy greens are as well. The thing is with iron as well, just be a bit careful in terms of it. Try not to have cups of tea and cups of coffee with your iron-rich meals, because that, again, can stop the absorption a little bit. And it helps if you add some sort of vitamin C, something rich in vitamin C. So like just have an orange after your meal, or add some bell peppers or something like that to your meal that's quite high in vitamin C. Squeeze some lemon juice on your meal, and that really helps with your iron absorption.
Great.
Thanks. I learned a lot here. Yeah.
Yes. And do you know, this always happens when we're recording this, but it's making me feel hungry. All this chat of nice food that I like. Lots of vegan diets have soya as a key ingredient. And there seems to be quite a lot of misinformation, I think, or confusing information about soya. Could you just explain to us why, is soya good or bad for us? Why do some people say it's bad for us? Yeah.
Soya is great. Soya is a great food. Yeah, there is confusion because there has been some studies, I think in the sort of late 90s, early noughties, there were some studies that were sort of people worrying about sort of cancer, breast cancer risk and things like that. But a lot of these studies were poorly designed. They were animal studies. Ridiculous amounts of soy isolates were given to rats that we would never have in those sort of amounts in a human diet, and obviously we're not rats either. But looking at the observational studies on humans, we know soy's been consumed for literally 2,000 more years, thousands of years. We know it's healthy food. The reason there's confusion is because it does have what we call phytoestrogens. So that's sort of plant estrogens. So people worry about this estrogenic effect that things like there are some breast cancers that are made worse by estrogen. So it's things like that people worry about. But actually this phytoestrogen doesn't act the same as mammalian estrogen. So estrogen that you would get in cow's milk, for example, that comes from mammals, would be similar to the estrogen, your own estrogen that's in your body, and that would cause those sort of problems. But with phytoestrogen, it sort of selects the receptors it attaches to in your body, and it actually sort of opposes. So some of the effects, like the effects on breast cancer and prostate cancer, sorry, it actually acts as an anti-estrogenic. I can't speak. It has an anti-estrogenic effect. So it sort of almost blocks the estrogen. So it's been shown that soya foods reduce the risk of breast cancer and reduce the risk of prostate cancer. That's really strong evidence we have about that, particularly the earlier you start having it. So if you have it as a child and an adolescent, it's even better. So that's strongly sort of proven that. And then on the bone, estrogen is good for your bone. And in your bone receptors, it acts as a pro-estrogenic. It has a pro-estrogenic effect. So it actually emphasizes the estrogen in your bone and helps your bone health. So again, it's been shown that soy foods actually increases your bone density, which is really important, especially, for menopausal women that start, having quite rapid bone loss after they lose their estrogen after the menopause. So that's really helpful. And actually talking about the menopause as well, there's been a recent study, I think it was Neil Barnard, has shown, that it can help with symptoms like your hot flushes, in night sweats and things like that, if you have quite a substantial, a couple of portions of soy foods a day. So it's actually really beneficial, and it's full of really good nutrients as well. It's full, as I said, if you get the calcium set one, it's full of calcium, it's got iron, it's got healthy unsaturated fats, high in protein, low in saturated fat. So it's a really, really good healthful food. So yeah.
Great.
I have another controversial one for you, or I guess not controversial, but often questioned and misunderstood, which is oils. Let's talk about refined vegetable oils. Should we avoid those?
Vegetable oils have the good fats, what we would call the good fats, unsaturated fats in them, as opposed to anything that's sort of hard at room temperature. So all your animal fats, things you think of butter and lard and things like that, they're hard at room temperature, aren't they? Solid, should I say. And also coconut oil and palm fat, they're solid at room temperature. So they've got the saturated fats in, which are the fats you want to avoid, really. So vegetable oils are fine. The only cautionary thing about vegetable oils, I guess, is if you are trying to manage your weight. They do, obviously just 1 tablespoon of vegetable oil has quite a lot of calories in it. So you would want to just minimize your oils if you're trying to watch your weight. But again, this is a bone of a hot topic, an argument within the plant-based community. Actually, there are some people that are big on sort of no oil. But personally, I think, in moderation, if you're just using a tiny bit in cooking, obviously you don't want to be deep frying everything, do you? But if you're just using a tiny bit in your cooking, or you're just drizzling some oil on your salads, then that's fine.
Great, good to know. We always finish by asking people about their favourite veggie, something that you like to cook or eat. Would you like to nominate a favourite vegetable?
Well, I've already talked about aubergines, so I think it's probably between that and mushrooms, actually. But actually, I suppose the one thing I really couldn't live without, if I had to, choose one thing, it would be greens. Leafy greens. If you said you could never have that again, I think I'd choose leafy greens.
Great. I love leafy greens as well. Thank you very much for talking to us today. That's been so helpful and informative. Would you like to stick around? Wendy and I are going to speak about some of the best things we ate during Veganuary 2024. Did you eat anything amazing during Veganuary 2024, Claire?
Do you know what I've discovered? I'm very fortunate. I have a lovely bakery and cafe down the road called Marmaduke's, and I normally buy sourdough bread from there. But just in January, I've discovered they do a delicious takeaway lentil dal with flatbread, and it is so nice. So I've had that. I've treated myself for lunch a couple of times and had that. Really nice. I
love a dal. How about you, Wendy? Any eating highlights from Veganuary 2024?
Yeah, I would say I've got a takeout highlight and a homemade highlight. So I live in a college town in Virginia, and we have a mellow mushroom pizza shop on the corner. So I had to go in and try their Veganuary special. And as always, it was a fantastic treat. And then ironically enough, if I'm being honest, I tend to cook less during Veganuary and maybe eat a little bit worse because it's such a busy time for us. So I was staying at my parents' in upstate New York over the holidays, and my mom cooked a beautiful meal made with fresh spaghetti squash from her garden and lots of garlic and olive oil and veggies. And just to have some garden fresh produce in the middle of winter was really lovely.
Nice. Do you know, we released our first ever cookbook that you can buy in the shops this year. I've got a copy here, the official Veganuary cookbook. So I have been cooking a few things from here. One that I really liked was black bean mole. Do you say mole? Is that how you say it? Mole or mole? I thought so.
Oh, you nailed it.
With sweet potato fries. I love sweet potato, so that was good. And also, it's my little boy's birthday in January. So there's a carrot cake in this cookbook, which is so good. So I made his birthday cake was a carrot cake. It's got tempeh in it, which I've never come across in a cake recipe before, but I think it gives it a really sort of nutty flavour. And he wanted it to be a Mickey Mouse cake, so it was Mickey Mouse icing. So there we go. Okay. This podcast was recorded at Distorted Podcast Studios and produced by Jim Moore at Bloody Vegans Productions. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and rate us 5 stars. If you want to contact us, you can email us at podcast@veganuary.com and you'll find Veganuary on all the normal social channels. You can take part in Veganuary by signing up at veganuary.com to receive 31 daily emails full of hints, tips and recipes which introduce you to a vegan diet. It doesn't have to be January. You can sign up at any time. Claire, thanks for joining us today. Thanks, Wendy.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely. And
Thanks, Claire.
Thanks for listening. See you later.
1, 2